Hello BookTube, and welcome to another weekly reading vlog. I've been trying to get my reading going again after several weeks of being very busy. Was working on these 4 books this week. Now, before I got super busy, I actually had a number of half-read books on my shelf. I've got the bad habit of starting too many books at once, thinking I can juggle a lot of books when I really can't. But even though I know this is a bad habit, I've already got myself into it. So I have these books that I had been reading before I got really busy a few months ago. And I'm going to try and get back into the old system I have, which is just every week read a little bit out of every book that I've got going. Even if it's just a couple pages, which I know is pretty pathetic by BookTube standards, but better than reading nothing for a whole week. So I'm going to try, I probably shouldn't make promises, but I'm going to try and get that going for this coming week. So the grammar book, haven't touched it for weeks, start that up again. Herodotus, haven't touched it for weeks, start that up again. The Bible, I haven't touched it for weeks. Start that up again. It's Vietnamese study book. Now, I actually have been studying Vietnamese. I've been doing Quizlet. I've been doing Duolingo. The Duolingo I've kept up even when I've been really busy, just because if you use Duolingo, you know you don't want to lose your streak. You get like the streak built up. It's not even losing my streak per se. It's just I know that if I miss one day, then I'll just let myself miss 2 days and then I'll just stop doing it. And I'm really, one of my New Year's resolutions was to really study Vietnamese this year. Anyways, point being, I have been studying Vietnamese, but I haven't been using the book. Get back into that. But none of those have been for this week. This week I've just managed to get these books going again. So I'll start with the complete Stories of Oz because I've got the least to say on this. I started the last book in this collection, the last book that L. Frank Baum wrote before he died, Glinda of Oz, book number 14. And I regret to say that I only read about 4 pages of it. Excuse me. The main reason being is that this book I find a little bit unwieldy to take with me at work. And work these days is where I get most of my reading done. I've got a long lunch break at the moment. Like I said, I'm not as busy as I used to be. So I try and get reading done then. But this book, because it's so big, it just stays home. And I haven't been getting that much reading done at home. But I'm going to try and get back into that. I've long ago gotten off the schedule that Dane Cobain and I had for the buddy reads on that, but I still do want to finish up the last book. The Wayfarer Redemption, I've managed to read a few chapters of this without getting into the whole plot of everything. I guess basically I'm going to repeat myself from last week. I'm enjoying the narration style. I'm enjoying the plot or finding the plot interesting. There are a few twists and turns here. The characters are coming off as a little bit flat and cliched. So 2 out of 3. On the whole, I'm glad I'm reading it. Stick with that. Then Teaching Reading Skills. This is a book I just started up early this week. I did a started video this past week, which I'll link to down below. And I've read the first 3 chapters of this. Part 1, divided into 3 parts here. Introductory, Reading Skills and Strategies, and Planning and Teaching. The first 3 chapters are the introductory part, and I managed to read those this week. We'll see how this book develops. Obviously, I'm just got the introduction done. I mean, it's a long introduction, 40 pages, but the part that's labeled the introduction. I'm hoping that I'm going to get some useful ideas out of this book for what to do in my own reading classes. Thus far, it's been all stuff I know, and yeah, I mean, part of the problem is I've been teaching English now for a number of years and reading these types of books for a number of years now, as well as getting a number of qualifications along the way, CELTA, the Delta, master's degree. So sometimes when I go to these books, I find it's just retreading the same thing that always comes up in these books. And if you're in the field, you'll know exactly what I mean. Activating the schemata, scaffolding, Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, Krashen's N+1, top-down processing and bottom-up processing. All this, discourse analysis, all this stuff that is in a million other books. But it is only the introduction, so maybe I'll get some useful stuff out of this yet. Although it is worth remembering that I think this Macmillan Publishers series is maybe based targeting more beginning teachers. That being said, though, even though this is stuff I've been through, I don't know how many times before, the author, Christine Nuttall, does a very good job of explaining it. Like, I'm impressed by how she breaks it all down and explains it in such clear ways. Even though it's ground I've already been through before, I thought it was very clear explanation there. And then the Iliad. Last week I kind of didn't really talk much about what I read in the Iliad just because I had read so much, and possibly because I was feeling tired last week at the time I filmed the video. But this week, maybe I'll get into it a little bit. I mean, that's what these weekly reading vlogs are supposed to be for. So, this week I read chapters 17, 18, and 19. Sorry, 16, 17, and 18. So, 16, 17, and 18. So, Patroclus takes on Achilles' armor. He goes and he fights the Trojans. Hector kills him. Achilles finds out about it and goes into mourning. And then Thetis commissions Vulcan to create Achilles' new armor. I'm going to assume, maybe for the purposes of this video, that most people on BookTube are already intimately familiar with the Iliad. So I'll just rehash some of these plot points, assuming that familiarity. Something that, as I mentioned last week, I've read this book a couple times before, but haven't read it since high school. So it's interesting. Some of this stuff I still remember very well, and some of this stuff I've forgotten a little bit. One of the things that surprised me upon rereading is how little screen time Patroclus gets before he dons Achilles' armor and goes out and gets killed. Because, of course, Achilles' grief over the death of Patroclus is what's going to drive the whole last part of the Iliad. So I guess in my mind I had been imagining a more intimate relationship between the two of them. But there's very little chemistry between them. And they share very little on-screen time together. I mean, Patroclus has popped up a little bit, but Patroclus pops up because he's going over and he's talking to the other Greeks, and he's trying to act as an intermediary between the other Greeks and Achilles a little bit. But there are not really scenes of him and Achilles talking a lot or showing any great intimacy. So, rereading this, it seems to come out of nowhere Achilles' intense grief at the death of Patroclus. Now, I guess the ancient readers of the Iliad, Homer was assuming familiarity with this story already. So maybe you just know that Achilles and Patroclus are intimate because you just know that before you even pick up the book. It's just part of the backstory that everybody knows about. So Patroclus puts on Achilles' armor. Achilles gives him the instruction to only drive the Trojans away from the Greek ships, but not to go any further. And of course, immediately after Patroclus puts on the armor, he immediately forgets all about that. Although, if memory serves, the narration never actually says anything like Patroclus forgot about his instructions. So I guess maybe it's a little bit ambiguous about whether Patroclus forgot about it or whether he just disregarded it. Patroclus even tries to sack Troy, but is knocked down by Apollo 3 times. And then I think Apollo even scolds him at the end. My favorite part of the Iliad is the gods coming in the fighting. Sarpedon, who is one of the heroes of the Trojan allies, gets killed by Patroclus. That is one scene I do remember from my previous readings of this book. Zeus lamenting the fact that his son was going to get killed by Patroclus. Although something that's different from my memory, something that I have forgotten about, is how brief all of these fights are. And I mean like all of them throughout the Iliad. So it's really built up. Here's Patroclus, here's Sarpedon. But instead of like a big long fight, Sarpedon throws his spear and like he misses, and then Patroclus throws his spear and gets Sarpedon. And that's the way like all of these fights go in the Iliad. Even the fights that are built up a lot just seem to. I mean, I guess the exception is Hector fighting Ajax. They actually have to get out their swords for that fight. And Menelaus and Paris at the beginning of the Iliad, they both throw their spears and continue fighting afterwards. But other than that, there's not a lot of long blow-by-blow fighting between any two individuals. What makes the fight scenes so long, in the sections where the fight scenes are long, is just all the different individuals who come in to participate. And then Patroclus is killed. Now, this is another part I've forgotten. I guess maybe I've been thinking of that Troy movie or whatever. I forgot how hard it was for Hector to kill Patroclus. So, first of all, the god Apollo has to come in and knock Patroclus around a little bit. So, like, the god Apollo knocks off his armor, knocks off his helmet, and stuns Patroclus with a blow to the back of the head. So, like, Patroclus is dizzy from getting beat up by Apollo. And then there's another guy, Euphorbus, who gets Patroclus in the back with a spear. And then Hector finally finishes him off. But, I mean, I guess the implication here, obviously, is that it's not a fair fight. I guess when you're reading the Iliad, you're constantly being reminded that it's from the Greek perspective. It's the Greeks who are writing this. So if a Greek hero ever gets killed by a Trojan hero, it has to be built up how the Trojans weren't fighting fair or how the gods intervened or something like that. And then after Patroclus gets killed, there's this long battle over his body. which just goes on and on and on. It's all of chapter 17, and chapter 17 is, how long is chapter 17? Chapter 17 is like 17 pages long, and then it goes into chapter 18. And to a certain extent, maybe it goes on a little bit too long, at least from my perspective as a modern reader. But I find it fascinating that, you know, all of this has survived down the ages to us, some 3,000 years, where all the scribes who would have to copy it over the centuries, right? Because any one copy of the Iliad is never going to last 3,000 years. The way this book has lasted is through being copied and recopied. So much detail in this battle that so many scribes have preserved for us by rewriting it over and over again. I find that part interesting. There's some interesting back and forth in this battle where the Trojans have the body of Patroclus, and then the Greeks get it, and the Trojans try and get it back. Hector and Aeneas team up at one point, and then they're going after Achilles' horses. Now, with Patroclus, there's this other guy who's minding Achilles' horses, and his name is, what is it? Starts with an A. Automedon, who hadn't been a big part of the Iliad before, but now is popping up as like a name that seems to be of assumed familiarity, like I guess Homer's original audience must have known who this guy was. He was, I guess he's the guy who takes care of Achilles' horses. I looked him up on Wikipedia just out of curiosity. I didn't remember him. He doesn't really seem to show up in a lot of stuff outside of the Iliad. I think he shows up in the Aeneid. Am I pronouncing that right? The Aeneid, during the fall of Troy. He's one of the Greeks who is depicted killing the Trojans during the fall of Troy. But anyways, he's trying to get Achilles' horses back, and Nestor's son Antilochus comes up. And then, Achilles is finally given the news that Patroclus is dead by Nestor's son, and that there's a fierce battle going on over Patroclus's body. But Achilles actually can't go out to rescue Patroclus's body because he doesn't have his armor, because Patroclus was wearing his armor. Now Hector has his armor. Hector's actually put on Achilles' old armor. But he does, one of the gods, which god was it? Was it Juno? Or no, it looks like it was Eris, the messenger of the gods, on behalf of Juno, tells Achilles to just stand by the edge of the ship so the Trojans can see him, and that causes them to get frightened. So then Achilles is in grief, and his mother promises to get him more armor, and she goes up to Vulcan. Sorry, I'm using the Roman names for these gods because this translation does easier for me because it's in my head at the moment. Now there's a couple things I noticed with when Thetis goes up to meet Vulcan. One is Vulcan has a wife here. What's her name? But his wife is not Venus. And I think in other sources his wife is in Venus. And in fact, if memory serves, in the Odyssey, Vulcan's wife is Venus, isn't it? I haven't reread the Odyssey, so I'm going off of my 8th grade memories here. But fairly sure. The other thing is, I swear it was mentioned earlier in the Iliad that the reason that Vulcan is lame is because Zeus threw him out of Olympus because he was sticking up for his mother, Juno. Here, though, it's mentioned that it's mentioned that he got thrown out of Olympus because his mother, Juno, was appalled by him when he was born crippled. Now, I think both explanations are in Greek mythology. Like, those are both, you know how there's like alternate versions of every story in Greek mythology. I think I've heard both of those versions before, but I was surprised to find them both in the same book. Would that be an argument for the people who don't think that the Iliad was the work of one man? Those little contradictions. I don't know. I recently asked that question on Steve Donahue's Q&A. You know, the Homer question: were the Iliad and the Odyssey the work of one man? And Steve Donahue, who knows his stuff, said, yeah, he didn't think there was any question that it was one man who composed the poems, although he was drawing on stories, of course, that had been handed down. So yeah, that's. Sorry. And then Achilles Shield, the famous description of Achilles Shield in chapter 18. I remember this both kind of confusing me and boring me from when I read this back in high school and middle school. There's these descriptions of everything that Vulcan carved onto, or carved isn't the right word, but all these pictures that Vulcan put onto Achilles' shield. And all these scenes are vividly described. So I remember high school me is thinking, well, how do you get all these scenes onto one shield? I mean, first of all, how big is this shield? But you know, I could go along with maybe one scene being depicted on the shield. But you know, there's scenes of battle and war and harvesting and lions eating cattle. I mean, there's just all the stuff that's described as being on the shield. So yeah, and the other thing, I recall it boring me a little bit because it had nothing to do with the main story. And sure enough, when I reread it, I found it was a little bit boring as well. Although it was shorter and easy to get through than I remembered. Yeah, I went to Wikipedia after having read that section just to see what Wikipedia had to say about it. And yeah, Wikipedia had some illustrations of what some different artists have thought Achilles' shield would look like, and how all these different depictions would be on one shield and how they'd be interacting with each other. That was interesting to see. And they also had some theories about what it all means. Some people think it means, you know, both the best and worst of human nature, these different scenes of war and peace, happiness and sadness. Some people think it was just, you know, the totality of life as the Greeks knew it, all these different scenes, you know, scenes of war and scenes of agriculture and all that stuff. Basically, nobody really knows, is what I got out of Wikipedia. And yeah, that's the Iliad for this week. So that's the last part I read is Thetis taking the armor from Vulcan and bringing it down to Achilles, and that's where I'm going to be picking up from next time with chapter 19. Yeah, and I think that's all my reading for this week. Oh, sorry, aside from the graphic novels. So I've done Tintin in the Land of the Soviets and Tintin in America this week. I don't have those books with me because I already returned them to the library. I'm doing Tintin and the Cigar of the Pharaohs. So yeah, I've decided to add graphic novels to the stuff I review. I hope I'm not wasting my time with this. I do have the feeling that these books are pretty silly. At the same time, though, I do feel like Tintin has enough recognizability in pop culture that, just for being culturally cognizant, might be worth reading through it. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Apparently, the critical consensus is that the books get better once you get out of the early ones. It's like that fabled TV show that doesn't get good until season 9, maybe. Maybe that's what Tintin will be like. We'll see. All right, that's all for this week.